So before we start, fun fact, I keep on telling people to stop going to the shops to buy chips. I mean, if you've got potatoes, just make them. Just make them. Just make them. Just make them. Hi. If you're here for the first time, my name is Z and welcome. I love making videos and I love to talk about the gear that I use, the process of making the videos that I make, and just talking about videos. If you've been here before, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about frame rates and why I think it's important for you to know what frame rates are and when you should be using them. So I divided today's video into 3 sections: what, where, and when. What? So every video that you've watched, or the one that you're watching right now of me, is actually made up of frames or images that are actually stacked one after the other in every second. So I'm actually shooting this video at 24 frames per second. And what that just means is there are 24 images in every second that you are seeing, but they are stacked so close to each other that they are making motion. And that's why you see this as a video. So just to illustrate, I'll show you right now. You're now watching this video at 2 frames per second and you're probably thinking, what happened to my internet? But no, you're fine. It's just me showing you at 2 frames per second. No one of course uses this, but it's just for illustration. I'm gonna bump it up to 8 frames per second. It's a little bit better, but I mean, now it just looks like, those really, don't worry, I'm waving my hands so that you see. But it's looking like, one of those cheap movies from I don't know when. But I'm gonna pump it back up to 24 frames per second and now I'm sure your eyes just sort of eased back and you feel like, okay, yes, this is what I'm used to seeing. This is how it should be. Where do you find frame rates? Where do we even talk about frame rates? Well, in pretty much every camera, in your phone camera and digital cameras. Actually, phone cameras have come a long way. I mean, my phone, Samsung, actually shoots up to 960 frames per second. That is insane for a phone. That's insane. But of course, they limited it to a function that they call super slow-mo. So you can only use it in that function. But if you want, there are probably third-party apps that you can pay for, and then you can use it in full manual mode if that's what you want to do. You've probably gone shopping for a camera, or you've looked up cameras and you saw the specs and you saw that shoots up to 60 FPS or 120 FPS. FPS pretty much stands for frames per second. When do you use 24 frames per second? When do you use 60 frames per second? Why do we even have different frames? Can't we just have a universal? No, we can't. In the film industry, 24 frames per second is what is actually known to be what's more cinematic and what looks more natural or more easy on the eye for you to see as real-time movement. So most of the movies that you've watched have probably all been shot in 24 frames per second. So I shoot 24 frames per second when I'm doing any corporate videos or interviews or anything film-like that I know I want to have a real-time experience for the viewer. For example, like this corporate video that I shot for a client, I shot it at 24 frames per second because I knew that I wasn't gonna tamper with the video in terms of slowing it down or manipulating the speed in any way, because I wanted that real-time experience for the viewer to have with the video. But when it comes to higher frame rates, like 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, my favorite reason of shooting higher frame rates is so that I can slow down the footage. Welcome to class. Let's say this is 24 frames per second and this is what we've agreed as being the least number of frames that you can have for it to still be normal for you to see the footage as you'd see in real life, right? So if I wanted to slow this down, I'd have to have lesser frames than 24 and the video would literally now become laggy a bit. But if I was shooting at 120 frames per second, I'd have so much information in 1 second that if I wanted to slow it down, I can pretty much slow it down and still have a smooth video flowing, because I have so much information in that second that I can afford to slow it down to 20%. For example, you can look at this fan-made fake advert that I did for Niederberg. I shot it at 120 frames per second, and that's why I was able to really slow down some of those shots to really get that dramatic look. Just a rule of thumb, you want to make sure that you set your shutter speed, which is another element of cameras, which again affects the amount of light that goes into your camera. But you want to set your shutter speed to be twice the number of your frame rate. So for example, again, I'm shooting this video at 24 frames per second, and my shutter speed is twice the number of that, which should be 48 mathematically, but cameras don't necessarily come with really exact numbers. So I only have a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. So I'm shooting using a shutter speed of 50 because I am shooting using a frame rate of 24. So if I was shooting at 60 frames per second, I would set my shutter speed at twice that, which would be 120. But again, my camera only has 125, so I use 125. If I was shooting at 120 frames per second, I would use a shutter speed of 240. But again, most cameras will have 250, so you use 250. Having it that way pretty much gives that more realistic look. Again, if you set your shutter speed too low, then there'll be too much motion blur in your videos. And if you set it too high, there'll be no motion blur and it'll be too sharp, and that you don't look realistic at all. So yeah, that's pretty much it with frame rates. I mean, there's so much information online already to do with frame rates. If you really want in-depth information, I mean, YouTube is full of videos like this. But hey, if you watched mine, hey, that's all I can pretty much say for today. But thanks for tuning in, and if you love this video and if it helped you, please make sure you hit the subscribe button and leave a comment down below and let me know what anything you can let me know about anything, really. I mean, any comment is allowed, it's allowed. Until next time.